WADR. Promoting dialogue.
It's 6 p.m. in Dakar and Banjul. Good evening and welcome to Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM. We're live online at wadr.org and on YouTube and Facebook at WADR. Here are the top stories. G-Talk warns Africa faces growing synthetic drug crisis as world marks 2026 International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking. Malian government announces a draft law to reorganize defense and security system to strengthen the fight against insurgency. U.S. Congressman Moore hails passage of state police bill by Nigerian federal lawmakers to address growing insecurity.
So what I'd like to see is devolved police powers, armed police presence in these states. UN Peacebuilding Fund hails Gambia's progress on transnational justice and human rights protection.
The greatest achievement in all these processes is the architecture that has been created, the legal framework and the policies in place.
Please stay tuned for the details of these stories and more.
On the news, this is Abdullahi Hassan.
Glad to have you join us. On the occasion of the 2026 International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking, a new report indicates that Africa is becoming increasingly integrated into the global synthetic drug trade. This integration is characterized by illegal drug laboratories, cross-border trafficking networks, and growing consumer markets spreading across the continent. The report was released earlier today by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. Emoredet has more.
GITOC's report warns that African countries are now playing a bigger role in the production, trafficking and consumption of synthetic drugs. It states that Mexican cartels have shifted some methamphetamine production to Africa, working with local criminal groups and using chemical ingredients sourced from Asia. It also noted that clandestine laboratories in East and Southern Africa are receiving chemical precursors from India. In West Africa, laboratory tests in Sierra Leone and Guinea-Bissau found that a wave of overdose deaths previously blamed on Kush, a street drug made from human remains, were actually caused by powerful synthetic drugs, including cannabinoids and etazines. Liberia and Sierra Leone, for example, have both declared national emergencies over drug and substance abuse, as authorities in the two countries have classified serious drug-related offenses as non-bailable in an effort to crack down on trafficking and abuse. Yet, the report also highlights growing divisions within the African Union over drug policy, with some member states favoring tougher security measures over public health responses. The latest figures from the West African Epidemiology Network on drug use show that Nigeria recorded the region's largest heroin seizures, while Togo reported nearly 16 tons of synthetic stimulants. Liberia saw a sharp rise in amphetamine seizures, and Sierra Leone recorded its first major seizure of the synthetic drug Captagon. For the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, GITOC, governments should rethink their strategies and strengthen international cooperation to combat organized crime and the rapid expansion of synthetic drug markets.
Emoredet with that report. Meanwhile, the Malian government has approved a draft law to reorganize the country's defense and security system as it seeks to strengthen its response to evolving security challenges. The bill was presented during the June 25 meeting of the Council of Ministers chaired by the Transitional President, General Assimi Goïta, at the Kuluba Palace. The proposed legislation would replace the current national defense law adopted in November 2004. Sankle Janko has more in this report.
According to the Malian government, the existing legal framework no longer reflects today's geopolitical, security and strategic realities. Officials say the reform is intended to address weaknesses identified over the years and provide a stronger legal foundation for ongoing reforms within the armed and security forces. The move comes after coordinated attacks on April 25 targeted several locations, including Kati, Bamako, Mopti, Gao and Kidal, highlighting the need for improved military coordination and stronger protection of strategic sites. The reform also follows major changes in Mali's security environment after the withdrawal of the French Barkhane force in 2022 and the departure of the United Nations peacekeeping mission, MINUSMA, at the end of 2023. Since then, the government has focused on strengthening the Malian armed forces and reinforcing national sovereignty in defense and security operations. Authorities have not yet disclosed the specific provisions of the draft law or indicated when it will be debated and implemented. They say the objective is to establish a legal framework better suited to current threats and the country's evolving defense needs.
Sankule Janko reporting there. Now, a U.S. congressman has welcomed Nigeria's move to establish state police forces, describing it as a major step toward tackling the country's security challenges. Congressman Riley Moore praised President Bola Tinubu for backing the state police bill, which was recently approved by federal lawmakers. Moore said devolving policing powers to the state would enable local authorities to respond more effectively to insecurity and reduce reliance on the federal government in Abuja. The U.S. lawmaker, who has previously raised concerns over attacks on vulnerable communities in Nigeria, said he had long advocated the reform among other recommendations submitted to the White House following his recent visit to the country.
We put together a formal report, presented that to the White House with a bunch of different recommendations, some of which you see are playing out right now. Well, one of them that I'm continuing to push on is that they have a centralized security force in that country. So their police, it's a national police force. The states, it's a very large country, the states have unarmed police. None of them are armed. So if there's an issue that needs to be addressed, people got to come out of Abuja and drive all the way down to wherever. And by then it's over, if they even respond. So what I'd like to see is devolved police powers, armed police presence in these states and giving them authority to be able to protect their own folks. Two is looking at trying to find ways that we can engage with Nigeria if they're going to do the right thing, right? This is all kind of based on confidence building measures on their side and seeing what they're going to do. Engaging with them and increasing perhaps economic cooperation in between our two countries, which I think would be very helpful for them and for us.
U.S. Congressman Riley Moore speaking there.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Many thanks for staying with us. As a reminder, we stream live at wadr.org and on YouTube and Facebook at WADR. The United Nations Peace Building Fund is marking its 20th anniversary with a high-level event in Dakar, Senegal, bringing together governments, UN officials, and civil society to reflect on 2 decades of supporting peace and preventing conflict. To commemorate the milestone, delegates will reflect on 2 decades of progress, share lessons learned, and discuss the future of sustaining peace in an increasingly complex global landscape. Since its establishment in 2006, the fund has invested billions of dollars in peace-building initiatives across more than 70 countries, including in West Africa. The Gambia, one of the fund's beneficiary countries, was featured in a documentary showcasing its journey from the human rights abuses under former President Yahya Jammeh to ongoing democratic and transnational justice reforms. Emmanuel Diouf is chairperson of the Gambia's National Human Rights Commission.
There was the TRRC that was funded, but they also funded other aspects of the TJ, security sector reform, which is still ongoing. Still ongoing, they're funded. They supported the CRC, the Constitutional Review Commission. Of course, as you know, the CRC is a political process. But key among what they supported and is seen today in the Gambia as a success is the establishment of the National Human Rights Commission, which is an oversight institution, a state institution, but independent of the government, which monitors detention facilities, prisons, It also receives complaints, human rights complaints, violation. It also investigates human rights violation. It has quasi-judicial power to sit over allegation of human rights violation. It has an advisory role to the government and many other functions and mandate of the National Human Rights Commission. And of course, because of the Peace Building Fund, within 3 years of the establishment of the National Human Rights Commission, the National Human Rights Commission today of the Gambia is a National Human Rights Commission that has an A status, which shows, and that has been accredited by the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions in Geneva, showing that the National Human Rights Commission of the Gambia is in full compliance with what is known as the UN Paris Principles as far as the way in which it conducts its business and investigate human rights matters.
One other area I would like you to highlight more is that of the transnational justice.
Well, the greatest achievement in all these processes is the architecture that has been created, the legal framework and the policies in place. Whereas the Gambia was coming from a country of impunity to a country where you have all these systems that are now in place. And that is why actually it is working. Opening up of the civic space. That is another important factor here. You understand what transpired during the time of Yahya Jammeh. He actually said that he was going to send all the journalists, human rights activists 6 feet deep. So this was a culture that was in the Gambia. But since the emergence of the new government and with the support especially of the Peace Building Fund, we have been able to create a space for civil society to operate, and especially the media houses. But that doesn't mean that we should just relax. That is why you need institutions that will make sure that the government of the day and also the right holders abide by rule of law.
Emmanuel Diouf, chairperson of the Gambia's National Human Rights Commission, speaking there. Elsewhere, the ECOWAS Court of Justice has ruled against Togo's constitutional reform, declaring the changes unconstitutional. The regional court delivered its judgment after opposition parties and civil society organizations challenged the legality of the constitutional amendments. Christopher Ticho tells us more.
The ECOWAS Court of Justice says Togo's constitutional reform, adopted shortly before the country's legislative elections and without broad national consultation, constitutes what it describes as an abuse intended to consolidate political control. According to the court, the constitutional amendment violates Article 23 of the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. The ruling has been welcomed by Sambiri Tagon, a member of the African Socialist Democrat Party.
The ECOWAS Court of Justice based its rulings on Article 23 of the African Charter, concluding that Togo's constitutional reform is undemocratic. The changes were designed to entrench those in power, allowing them to remain in office indefinitely, and that is unacceptable.
The applicant who brought the case has also hailed the judgment. Opposition leader Bridget Ajamagbo says the ruling is an effective legal instrument that will help further mobilize the population against the constitutional reform.
We believe this ruling is a powerful legal instrument that the ECOWAS Court of Justice has placed in our hands. It is now up to us to ensure that this important tool is used effectively and does not lose its impact.
Although the ECOWAS Court's decision does not automatically alter Togo's existing institutions or overturn the constitutional changes, it provides opponents of the reform with a fresh legal basis to challenge it. The Togolese government has not yet reacted to the court ruling.
Christopher Ticho reporting. You are listening to Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM Dakar, Senegal, online at wadr.org, and on YouTube and Facebook at WADR. Here's a reminder of our top stories. GITOC warns Africa faces growing synthetic drug crisis as world marks 2026 International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking. The Malian government announces a draft law to reorganize defense and security system to strengthen fight against insurgency. U.S. Congressman Moore hails passage of state police bill by Nigerian federal lawmakers to address growing insecurity. And we also told you that UN Peace Building Fund has hailed Gambia's progress on transnational justice and human rights protection. Still ahead in the news, we have the guest interview and sports news. Please stay with us.
West Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
Many thanks for staying with us. Let's now take you to Ghana, where the government has reached an agreement with large-scale mining companies to purchase 30% of their gold output from July 1 as part of efforts to strengthen the country's foreign exchange reserves and expand local gold refining. The new arrangement increases the government's purchase share from the current 20%, with authorities saying the move will help retain more value for Ghana's gold resources while supporting economic stability. From Accra, Nadiri Tete reports.
Ghana will begin purchasing 30% of gold produced by large-scale mining companies from July 1 under a new agreement reached with the country's major miners. The government says the initiative is intended to strengthen the country's foreign exchange reserves while supporting efforts to expand domestic gold refining capacity. The new arrangement increases the state's share of gold purchases from the previous 20% agreement. The agreement follows weeks of negotiations between the government and the mining companies after the Bank of Ghana announced plans to increase its gold purchases as part of a broader reserve building strategy. Under the revised program, all gold acquired from the mining companies will be delivered in doré form, allowing Ghana to add more billion to its reserves while creating opportunities to process more gold locally. The policy forms part of Ghana's wider strategy to strengthen the cedi, diversify its reserve assets, and reduce reliance on foreign currencies. It also complements ongoing efforts in the gold sector aimed at increasing local value addition and improving oversight of the country's mineral resources. Ghana is Africa's largest gold producer, having recorded a historic 6 million ounces of production in 2025, with gold exports remaining the country's biggest source of foreign exchange. For WDR, Nadiri Tete, Accra.
The world today commemorates the International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking, also known as World Drug Day. A day meant to raise awareness against illicit drugs worldwide. This year's commemoration is being held under the theme, The World Drug Problem, Persisting Issues, New Challenges, Innovative Response. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, West Africa in particular remains a vital warehousing and transshipment hub, with an estimated 30% of Euro-bound cocaine routing through the region. The massive profits from this transit trade are fueling corruption and undermining local governance. Our Abuja correspondent, Echenus Asetu, took stock of the situation in Nigeria and now reports.
This is not a rudimentary setup. It was a sophisticated, highly organized transnational syndicate.
The discovery of a secret industrial-scale methamphetamine laboratory in a forest in Oyo State is a fresh reminder that Nigeria's drug problem is no longer limited to street-level drug use. The National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, NDLEA, says 5 suspects, including a Mexican national, were arrested after the facility was uncovered in Tapa Village, Ibarakwa North Local Government Area of Oyo State. The operation points to a troubling reality. Drug trafficking networks are becoming more sophisticated, while the substances they produce and distribute continue to put communities, families, and young people at risk. The Director of Media and Advocacy, Femi Babafemi, says the agency is intensifying efforts to disrupt drug cartels.
They include a 56-year-old Mexican methamphetamine expert, Joseph Villa Ochoa, brought in specifically to provide the technical expertise for large-scale synthesis, and 4 Nigerian collaborators providing logistical support, cover, and local operations. The arrest of a foreign cartel specialist on Nigerian soil underscores the transnational nature of this threat. But more importantly, it underscores our agency's world-class intelligence capability to track, intercept, and neutralize them.
But curbing drug abuse requires more than arrests and seizures. Nigeria's 2018 National Drug Use Survey estimated that about 14.3 million people between the ages of 15 and 64 had used drugs in the previous year. Nearly 3 million people were estimated to be living with drug use disorders. Consultant psychiatrist Dr. Sunday Amusu explains that addiction does not happen overnight.
There are dopamine receptors in the brain. Those dopamine receptors, they are pleasure principle. Anything you do, you enjoy, you go back to it. That's what happened when they go into drug. The pleasure they derive from normal things like food, sex, being thirsty and you drank water is far less than when they now take drug. That's how they become dependent. All in the brain.
For those already struggling with dependence, treatment can be the difference between recovery and a worsening crisis.
Every secondary care, general hospitals, must have a psychiatric facility that will be accessible to people in the community, that they can come for treatment if they have a drug problem. Even at primary care level.
As the world marks the 2026 International Day Against Drug Use and Illicit Trafficking, attention is focused on the theme, the World Drug Problem, Persisting Issues, New Challenges, Innovative Responses. The theme reflects the need for responses that go beyond arrests to include prevention, early intervention, treatment, and community support. Anti-addiction advocate Andrew Onyebuchi says tackling drug abuse cannot be left to government agencies and health professionals alone.
It affects the economy, it affects our future, it affects the nation, it affects crime, insecurity, and a host of other problems that are associated with it. And that's why it's important that we give this attention. It is everybody's responsibility.
The fight against drug abuse cannot be won by enforcement alone. It will require a response that protects young people, supports families, disrupts criminal networks, and gives people struggling with drug dependence a real path to recovery. For WADR, Yechenu Sasetu in Abuja.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is The Guest.
The guest segment this evening takes us back to Togo, a country where the ECOWAS Court of Justice has just rejected its constitutional reform. The court issued a ruling deeming the changes of region unconstitutional. Opposition parties and civil society organizations in Togo filed the case. Our guest is Madi Jabakate, a political scientist and president of the Center for Democratic Governance and Crisis Prevention, who weighs in on the matter.
I think it's a decision to be welcomed, but it comes late, because when you take into account the fact that this reform dates back to 2024 and it is in 2026 that this decision arrives, in reality, it becomes a flop because it was the most important at the time this situation arose. So it remains debatable, but it confirms everyone's analysis. It can be said that on the main element of Article 23.5 of the African Charter on Democracy and Elections and Governance, the court agrees with all those who have submitted the case and finds that Togo has violated those claims. And that is one more element in the fight for the restoration of the Fourth Republic, in which many political parties and civil society actors are mobilized.
The judgment of the ECOWAS Court of Justice does not, of course, automatically modify the institutions in place, but what impact can it have on the progress of the country?
It's a question of narrative. The ruling acknowledges one thing, that this reform violated certain provisions, and from that point on, there needs to be a reversal. That's the crux of the matter. It's true that the court didn't order a return to the Fourth Republic, But when you consider the violations that were mentioned, it obviously means that the reform of this constitution needs to be reversed. Perhaps the procedure needs to be reviewed first, and the matter might need to be put back before the voters for a sort of referendum on the constitution, obviously while reviewing certain related aspects. So that's the most logical consequence that could arise from this court's decision, because it's important to remember that the constitutional reform was adopted in a problematic context. It's also important to remember that it transferred the bulk of executive power to the Prime Minister, making the President of the Republic a mere figurehead. But it also had the effect of circumventing presidential term limits. Similarly, as I said, there was no broad national consultation, and the principle of democratic alternation was also, in one way or the other, undermined. So we can say that the court today, without issuing a clear ruling, notes that there has been an unconstitutional amendment by the government within the meaning of the African Charter. Therefore, it is important that the court did not condemn Togo for violating citizens' right to participate in the management of public affairs, but it did note a violation of the principle of democratic transfer of power and political alternation as protected by Article 23 of the African Charter on Democracy, and that is what needs to be rectified.
Does this decision invalidate the institutions that have been put in place?
You know, it all comes down to interpretation. And obviously, when you consider that the Togolese government did everything it could to avoid appearing before the court in this case, then following that logic, it means that the Togolese government will not consider the provisions. It will take political measures to capitalize on what the court has highlighted. But technically, we can already say that all the institutions, starting with the Constitution itself, are illegitimate and illegal. And de facto, all the institutions that stem from it are also illegitimate, unless the process resumes and the various parameters can be reassessed.
Madi Jabakati is a political scientist and the president of the Center for Democratic Governance and Crisis Prevention. All right, in the sporting world, the group stage of the 2026 FIFA World Cup has given football fans plenty to talk about, with statistics telling us that Africa's 10 representatives scored a combined 12 goals while conceding 15 goals. Europe's teams have found the net 16 times, conceding 11 goals, while South America's representatives scored 13 goals and conceded just 7, making them the strongest defensive confederation among the three. Looking strictly at the numbers, Africa wasn't far behind in attack, but defensively, there was a noticeable gap. Morocco scored 6 goals while conceding only 3, comfortably securing qualification. Egypt also impressed, scoring 4 goals and conceding just 2. Côte d'Ivoire matched Egypt's defensive record with 4 goals scored and 2 conceded, and in a place in the round of 32. Ghana, meanwhile, remained defensively solid, conceding no goals, although they managed to score only 1. These performances suggest that some African teams have found a balance between attack and defensive discipline. While several teams made Africa proud, others endured difficult tournaments that significantly affected the numbers, which suggests Africa is closing an attacking gap but still trays defensively. Now, that said, the FIFA World Cup 2026 action continues today with several key group stage matches on the schedule. France is taking on Norway in a highly anticipated clash, while Senegal faces Iraq at 7 p.m. local time in another important fixture for qualification hopes. Later tonight, Uruguay meets Spain in heavyweight encounter, followed by Cape Verde against Saudi Arabia. And then Belgium will face New Zealand, while Egypt go up against Iran. And with that, we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and special thanks to Maudo Diouf and Jaosino Kappa Gomez for the technical assistance. Follow us on our social media platforms, X, Instagram, and Facebook at WADR, and stream live at wadr.org. I am Abdullahi Hassan. Good evening.
We thank you for listening to Newslink in Nigeria on Love FM Abuja and Darling FM Owerri. in the Gambia on Hot FM Banjul, Hilltop FM and Veritas Radio in Serekunda. Thank you for listening on Alternative Youth Radio Lofa County, Liberia, Radio Kegaman in Nimba County and DCN Radio Riverses County. A big thank you to Radio Graft FM in Sierra Leone for listening, and in Ghana we thank Radio Pad in Damango and Royals FM in Wenchi. Thank you all for listening to Newslink.